Harry's relationship with Chelsy Davy, the true love of his life, front and centre.
You will not believe what happened to Prince Harry's ex-girlfriends. One built an empire from nothing. One was destroyed by the press. And one, she is completely unrecognizable today. These women were once the most talked about people on the planet, and then they disappeared. But the truth about what happened behind closed doors will leave you speechless. Nobody warned them about what was coming. Nobody protected them. And for at least one of them, the consequences were absolutely devastating. You think you know this story? Trust us, you have absolutely no idea. Prince Harry's love life has been one of the most talked about topics in royal coverage for the better part of 2 decades. Most people are familiar with how his story eventually played out. The transatlantic romance, the wedding watched by millions, the move away from royal duties, and the life he and Meghan Markle have built together in the United States. But before all of that, there was a long and varied romantic history that many people either don't know about or have simply forgotten over the years. Some of these women had serious relationships with him. Others were linked to him through little more than a single night out or a rumor that took on a life of its own in the tabloid press. Either way, each of their stories is worth telling. Not just because of their connection to Harry, but because of who they are and what they've gone on to do with their own lives. So let's go back to the beginning. Long before Harry became the globally recognized figure he is today, he was a young man growing up in one of the most unusual and high-pressure environments imaginable. Being a member of the British royal family comes with a level of public attention that very few people can truly prepare for, and the people who choose to get close to royals often find that out the hard way. For some of the women in Harry's past, that scrutiny became too much to handle. For others, the relationship simply ran its natural course. And for a few, the connection was so brief or so informal that calling it a relationship at all might be something of a stretch. With all of that in mind, here is a look at where things began. The first name that tends to come up when people look back at Prince Harry's romantic history is Natalie Pinkham. The two of them first crossed paths in 1999 at the Rugby World Cup, when Harry was still a teenager. They didn't start dating at that point, but they stayed in touch, and a few years later, in 2003, they briefly dated. By all accounts, the relationship was short and the split was friendly. There doesn't appear to have been any falling out between them, and the two reportedly stayed on good terms long after going their separate ways. In fact, according to a source who spoke to Vanity Fair in 2018, Harry and Pinkham were still in contact with each other well into his adult life. That same source noted that Pinkham was apparently a little surprised not to have received an invitation to Harry's wedding to Meghan Markle in 2018, given that they had remained friendly over the years. Whether there was any particular reason for the oversight or whether it simply came down to the practicalities of organising a large royal wedding is not entirely clear, but it doesn't seem to have caused any lasting tension. As for Pinkham herself, she has built a very successful life since her early days in Harry's orbit. She married Owen Walbioff, and the couple have 2 children together, a daughter named Willow and a son named Wilf. Alongside family life, she has maintained a thriving career as a television presenter, most notably working for Sky Sports F1, where she has become a well-known face in the world of Formula One coverage. It's a field that has traditionally been dominated by men, and Pinkham has been open about her desire to help change that. She has spoken publicly about wanting to bring more women into the sport, both in front of the camera and in the audience, and has described it as something she feels genuinely passionate about. By any measure, she appears to be someone who has taken the opportunities in front of her and made the most of them. The next name is one that comes with a bit more ambiguity. Cassie Sumner, a model, was never officially in a relationship with Prince Harry, but she did claim to have had a brief encounter with him back in 2004. According to reporting in the Mirror, the two met at a nightclub where Harry had been spending the evening with a group of friends. Sumner said that she and Harry spent around 45 minutes together at the venue that night. She was fairly candid about the encounter when she later spoke about it, describing Harry as a perfectly nice young man who was simply enjoying a regular night out. She also noted, perhaps a little bluntly, that she hadn't particularly fancied him at the time, but that he had come across as a decent and genuine person, just a regular 19-year-old having a good time despite the royal title. It's worth pointing out that Sumner herself was never one to chase the spotlight when it came to this particular story. She spoke about it, but she didn't make a career out of the association, and in the years that followed, she moved away from the kind of public life that tabloid coverage often assumes people in her position must want. These days, she is married to Portuguese footballer José Fonte, and by the looks of things, she is living a life that is focused very much on her family. She is active on social media, where she shares pictures of her children and her husband, and her interests appear to center around fashion, travel, fitness, and nutrition. It is, by all accounts, a happy and settled life, one that exists almost entirely outside of the media attention that once briefly surrounded her name. Then there is Chelsy Davy, who is arguably the most significant figure in this first chapter of Harry's romantic history. The two of them were involved on and off for a considerable stretch of time, from around 2004 right through to 2011, and at various points during those years there was genuine speculation that they might end up getting married. Davy was a constant presence in Harry's life during some of his most formative years, and by the time they finally went their separate ways for good, they had been through a great deal together. Davy, who grew up in Zimbabwe and studied law at the University of Leeds, was not someone who had grown up with the expectation of royal life, and by her own account, the reality of it proved to be a serious challenge. The media attention that comes with being romantically linked to a member of the royal family can be relentless, and Davy has spoken honestly about how difficult she found that. In an interview with The Times, she described struggling to cope when things got particularly bad, and acknowledged that the pressure of being in the public eye in that way was genuinely hard to manage. Despite all of that, the relationship between Davy and Harry did not end badly. They remained close even after the romantic side of things came to an end, and Davy was actually present at Harry's wedding to Meghan Markle in 2018, which says quite a lot about the nature of the bond they managed to maintain. Since stepping back from that chapter of her life, Davy has focused her energy on something very much her own. In 2016, she launched Aya, a jewelry brand inspired by African design and craftsmanship. The brand reflects her roots and her personal aesthetic, and Davy has spoken about it with clear enthusiasm and pride. In an interview with Tatler, she described herself as being genuinely happy with where she is in her life right now, and there is little reason to doubt that. If the first chapter of Prince Harry's romantic history was defined by youth and the kind of relationships that tend to form when someone is still figuring out who they are, then the period that followed brought with it a different kind of complexity. The years around 2009 to 2011 were notable for a number of reasons when it came to Harry's personal life. His on and off relationship with Chelsy Davy was going through one of its more turbulent phases, and during the gaps that opened up in that time, a handful of other names became linked to the prince. Some through confirmed reports, others through little more than rumour and speculation. What ties this period together, though, is a recurring theme: the way in which the British press operated around Harry and the people close to him, and how that attention shaped the experiences of the women who found themselves caught up in it. The first name associated with this period is Astrid Harbord, and it is worth being upfront about the fact that the nature of her connection to Prince Harry is genuinely uncertain. The two had been friends for some time. Harbord is also known to have been part of the social circle around Kate Middleton, and in 2009, while Harry and Chelsy Davy were on one of their breaks, the tabloid press began reporting that the two might be more than just friends. The main fuel for these rumours appeared to be a single incident in which Harry and Harbord were reportedly seen returning to his apartment together after a night out. That was enough for the speculation to take hold, as it often does when it comes to royal coverage, but neither Harbord nor Harry ever confirmed that there was anything romantic between them. It is entirely possible that the two were simply friends who happened to spend time together, and that the press, always alert to the possibility of a royal romance, read more into it than was actually there. What is much clearer is what Harbord has done with her life since those days. She has carved out a genuinely impressive professional path for herself. She has worked as the director of membership and partnerships for the Burley Clubs, a collection of exclusive, private members clubs based in London that have a long and well-established reputation among a certain social set. It is a role that requires a particular combination of interpersonal skill, discretion, and an understanding of how to manage relationships with a very discerning clientele, qualities that Harbord appears to have in abundance. Beyond her professional life, she is also the co-founder of the Lady Garden Foundation, a women's health charity that focuses specifically on raising awareness and funding for gynecological health. It is a cause that sits close to the heart of many people, and the fact that Harvard has committed a significant amount of her time and energy to it speaks well of her priorities outside of work. Caroline Flack is a name that carries a great deal of weight, and telling her story requires a certain amount of care. Her connection to Prince Harry was brief. The two were introduced in 2009, and whatever was developing between them was quickly derailed by the press before it had a real chance to become anything meaningful. Flack was a television presenter who had begun making a name for herself in the entertainment industry, and the moment her association with Harry became public knowledge, the media response was immediate and, by most accounts, deeply unpleasant. In her memoir, which she titled Storm in a Sea Cup, Flack described the experience with a frankness that made clear just how damaging that period was for her. The press, she wrote, went into a frenzy, and the coverage was not limited to her alone. Reporters and photographers turned up outside the homes of her family members, including her parents, her siblings, and even her grandmother, in pursuit of a story. She described the intensity of that intrusion in terms that are difficult to read without feeling a degree of sympathy for what she went through. The phrase that reportedly appeared in some of the press coverage of the time, describing Flack as Harry's bit of rough, gives a fairly clear indication of the tone that was being set, and it was a tone that was unkind at best and genuinely cruel at worst. Whatever the reality of her brief connection with Harry, the way in which the media chose to frame and pursue the story left a mark on Flack that she spoke about openly in later years. After her association with Harry faded from the headlines, Flack went on to have other relationships that attracted similar levels of press interest, including one with Harry Styles of One Direction, a connection that again generated a significant amount of commentary, much of it negative, largely focused on the age gap between the two. Years later, Flack found herself at the center of another media storm following a separate incident, and the coverage that surrounded that period of her life was, by many accounts, relentless. In February 2020, Caroline Flack passed away. It was confirmed shortly after that she had taken her own life. In the aftermath of her death, there was a widespread and serious conversation in the United Kingdom about the role that press coverage had played in her life and whether the treatment she received over the years had contributed to the difficulties she faced. It was a conversation that was long overdue, and one that many people felt should have started much sooner. For anyone who may be struggling with their mental health or experiencing thoughts of suicide, support is available. Reaching out to a crisis line or a trusted person is always a worthwhile step. Moving on from that difficult story, the next name connected to Harry during this period is Camilla Romestrand, a Swedish singer who was the frontwoman of a band called Eddie the Gun. In October 2010, reports began circulating that Harry and Romestrand had become close, though again, this was one of those connections that was never officially confirmed by either party. The nature of their relationship, if indeed there was one beyond a casual friendship or a brief acquaintance, remained unclear, and the lack of confirmation from either side made it difficult for anyone on the outside to know what to make of it. What added an extra layer of intrigue to the story was Romestrand's public image, which was notably different from the kind of profile that the royal family tends to be comfortable with. Whether that had any bearing on the situation is impossible to say for certain, but it was something that commentators at the time took note of. In any case, the connection between the two appears to have been short-lived. Just a few months after the rumours surfaced, Harry was photographed with Chelsy Davy at Prince William and Kate Middleton's wedding, which suggested that whatever had or hadn't happened with Romestrand, it was not something that had lasted. Today, Romestrand appears to be living a quiet and contented life. She is active on social media, where she describes herself as a musician and a vegan chef, and she regularly shares pictures of her 2 children. It is a life that exists largely away from the spotlight, and she does not appear to have any particular interest in revisiting her brief association with the British royal family. The final name in this chapter is Florence Brudenell Bruce, a model who became romantically involved with Harry in 2011, shortly after his relationship with Chelsy Davy came to an end. The two got together relatively quickly after that split, and by a number of accounts, the connection between them was genuine. However, the relationship did not last long. Reports in the Mirror at the time suggested that it was over within a couple of months, though the reasons given for the breakup were somewhat contradictory depending on the source. One account suggested that Harry ended things because he was deeply focused on his military career at that point and was anticipating a deployment to Afghanistan. The idea of being in a committed relationship while preparing for active service was apparently not something he felt was fair on either of them. A separate source, however, told a rather different story, suggesting that it was actually Brudenell Bruce who ended the relationship, and that her reasons for doing so had to do with concerns about Harry's behaviour and the sense that his attention was not entirely where it should have been. As is often the case with stories like these, the truth is probably somewhere between the two versions, and neither Harry nor Brudenell Bruce ever made any public statements that settled the question one way or the other. What is clear is that Brudenell Bruce moved forward with her life in a very positive direction. She married Henry St. George, a millionaire, in 2013, and the couple have 2 children together. She has also developed a creative pursuit that has nothing to do with modelling or royal connections. She has become a potter and has even competed on The Great Pottery Throwdown, the British television series that brings together amateur potters to test their skills. It is the kind of unexpected detail that adds a genuinely human dimension to someone who might otherwise only be known as a footnote in the story of a famous ex-boyfriend, and it says something interesting about who she is and what she values beyond the world she once moved in. By the time the period between 2012 and 2015 arrived, Prince Harry was no longer the teenager who had briefly dated Natalie Pinkham, or the young man stumbling through the early years of a complicated on and off relationship with Chelsy Davy. He was in his late 20s, increasingly visible on the world stage and carrying with him all of the attention and scrutiny that comes with being one of the most recognisable members of the British royal family. The women whose names became linked to him during this stretch of years were, in many ways, quite different from one another. Some were established names in their own right, others were still building their careers, but a common thread runs through their stories. Again and again, the question of public life, media attention, and the cost of being associated with royalty comes up, and again, the women involved had to make decisions about how much of that they were willing to take on. The first name connected to Harry in this period is Mollie King, a singer and member of the British girl group The Saturdays. King and Harry were spotted together in 2012, and initial reports suggested that the two had been seen dancing at a social event. For a while, King was fairly tight-lipped about the nature of their connection, which is understandable given the level of press interest that any association with Harry tended to generate. She denied that anything was going on between them for a period of time, which is a fairly common response from people who find themselves caught in that kind of media spotlight before they are ready to address it publicly. By December of 2012, however, King had acknowledged that there was something to the rumours, though she kept the details deliberately brief. Speaking to Closer magazine, she confirmed that she had met Harry and that the two had gone out for a drink together. It was hardly a dramatic revelation, and the measured way in which she handled the whole thing suggested that she was someone who was comfortable enough in the public eye, given her career, to manage the attention without letting it overwhelm her. The relationship, whatever its precise nature, does not appear to have developed into anything serious, and the two went their separate ways without any particular fanfare. Since then, King has continued to build a well-rounded public profile. She works as a presenter on BBC Radio 1, which has kept her in the public consciousness long after the Saturdays wound down their activity as a group. She also writes a column for Marie Claire, covering topics including fashion, beauty, and lifestyle, and she maintains a personal blog where she shares details of her interests and her daily life. On a personal level, she has been in a relationship with England cricketer Stuart Broad since around 2012, a connection that has attracted its own share of media attention over the years, given both of their public profiles. By all accounts, it is a relationship that has stood the test of time, which is more than can be said for a good number of high-profile couples who come together under similar levels of scrutiny. The most significant relationship Harry had during this entire period, and arguably one of the most significant of his life before Meghan Markle, was with Cressida Bonas. The two were introduced by Harry's cousin, Princess Eugenie, and began seeing each other in 2012. What followed was a 2-year relationship that was serious enough that many observers, both inside and outside of royal circles, genuinely believed it might lead to an engagement. Bonas, a dancer and aspiring actress, was someone who clearly had her own ambitions and her own sense of identity, and from the outside the two seemed well matched in a number of ways. However, the relationship came to an end in 2014, and while neither party made any lengthy public statements about the reasons at the time, it has since become fairly well understood that the pressures of royal life played a significant role. Bonas reportedly found the constant public scrutiny that came with being Prince Harry's girlfriend deeply uncomfortable, and the prospect of that scrutiny becoming a permanent feature of her life was something she was not willing to accept. It is a decision that requires a certain degree of self-awareness and courage, walking away from a relationship with someone you care about because the life that comes attached to it is not the life you want for yourself, is not a simple or painless thing to do. In an interview with The Telegraph in 2020, Bonas spoke with considerable openness about her personal struggles, including a long-standing fear of rejection that she has had to work through over the years. She reflected on how that fear had shaped various aspects of her life and relationships, and suggested that since the end of her time with Harry, she had made a conscious effort to let go of anxieties that had previously held her back. It was a candid and thoughtful piece of self-reflection from someone who had clearly done a great deal of work on understanding herself. Despite the end of their romantic relationship, Bonas and Harry remained on good terms. She attended his wedding to Meghan Markle in 2018, which is a fairly meaningful signal that whatever difficulties accompanied their breakup, they were able to navigate their way to a genuine and lasting friendship on the other side of it. Since then, Bonas has focused her energy on her acting career, and she has accumulated a number of roles that have helped establish her as a credible presence in the industry. In July 2020, she married estate agent Harry Wentworth Stanley in a ceremony that was described as intimate and private, very much in keeping with someone who has consistently shown a preference for keeping her personal life away from unnecessary public attention. Then there is Ellie Goulding, one of the most successful musicians to have her name connected to Harry's during this period, even though the nature of their connection was never actually confirmed by either of them. The two were first spotted together at a polo match in 2016, and the images of them in what was described as a cozy interaction were enough to set the rumour mill turning at full speed. Goulding, who by that point was already a globally recognised artist with a string of hit records to her name, found herself fielding questions about Harry in interviews despite never having publicly acknowledged that they were anything more than acquaintances. When the Australian television programme The Project pushed her on the subject, going so far as to ask whether the two were expecting a baby together, Goulding shut the suggestion down with a firm no, and described her interviewers as naughty, naughty people. It was a response that managed to be both definitive and good-humoured at the same time, which is a difficult balance to strike when you are being asked about your personal life in a format that does not leave much room for nuance. What is perhaps most interesting about Goulding's response to this entire episode is not the denial itself, but the broader stance she has taken on the subject of how she is perceived in relation to the men she has been linked to over the course of her career. In an interview with The Independent in 2020, she spoke directly about the frustration of having her identity and her achievements filtered through the lens of her romantic associations. She made the point clearly and without apology that she has every right to be recognised as a successful person in her own right, rather than being defined by the men she has been connected to, whether those connections were real or simply the product of tabloid speculation. It is a position that is difficult to argue with, particularly given the scale of what she has achieved professionally. Since the polo match rumours, Goulding has continued to release music and build her career, and she became engaged to art dealer Casper Jopling in 2019, a relationship that moved her personal life in a new and apparently positive direction. The final name in this part of Harry's story is Jenna Coleman, the actress who is perhaps best known internationally for her work on the long-running British science fiction series Doctor Who, and who has since taken on a number of other high-profile roles. Coleman and Harry were briefly linked in 2015 after being spotted together at a polo event, and the proximity of two well-known figures in an informal social setting was once again enough to generate a wave of press speculation. A source quoted in The Mirror at the time stated that nothing had actually happened between the two, and that any suggestion of a romance was wide of the mark. Despite that denial, the rumours persisted for a while, with some reports suggesting that even if there had been a mutual attraction, the conflicting demands of both of their schedules had made it difficult for anything to develop. Whether or not any of that is true is something that the public is unlikely ever to know for certain, and both Coleman and Harry have kept the matter firmly private. What is not in any doubt is the strength of Coleman's career in the years since her name was briefly connected to Harry's. She went on to take on the role of Queen Victoria in the television drama Victoria, a performance that earned her significant critical praise and introduced her to a much wider audience. She described her connection to the role in an interview with PBS, saying simply that she loves it and feels very rooted in the character, which suggests a level of engagement with the material that goes well beyond the surface. It is a fitting note on which to close this chapter of Harry's romantic history. A woman who, whatever may or may not have happened at a polo party in 2015, has gone on to play a queen in her own right. By early 2016, Prince Harry was entering what would turn out to be the final chapter of his life as a single man. He was in his early 30s, and while his romantic history had already attracted more than its fair share of press coverage, the connections that emerged during this period were notably brief, more like fleeting moments than anything that had time to develop into something meaningful. And yet even these short-lived associations tell us something interesting, both about Harry at that particular point in his life and about the women involved, who in both cases have gone on to build impressive lives and careers that have very little to do with their brief proximity to a British prince. Thus, first of these two names is Juliet Label. In early 2016, reports began appearing in the tabloid press suggesting that Harry had been spending time with Label, who was at that point working as a public relations assistant and pursuing ambitions in acting. According to a source who spoke to E! News, the two had been introduced through a mutual friend and had gone on a date together on New Year's Eve. It was, by all accounts, a low-key and relatively informal connection, the kind of thing that might not have attracted any attention at all had one of the people involved not been one of the most photographed members of the British royal family. The two never officially became a couple, and whatever momentum there may have been behind their initial meetings appears to have faded fairly quickly. Reports at the time suggested that they maintained some level of contact for a period after their alleged date, but that the connection gradually petered out without any particular drama or incident. It was not the kind of story that generated headlines for long, partly because there was simply not that much to report, and partly because both Label and Harry conducted themselves in a way that gave the press very little to work with. What makes Label's story genuinely interesting is not her brief association with Harry, but what she has gone on to achieve since then. At the time of the reported connection, she was still in the relatively early stages of building a career in the entertainment industry. In the years that followed, however, she has made considerable progress. She transitioned from the aspirational stages of an acting career to actually establishing herself as a working actress with a real presence in the industry. The trajectory of her career since 2016 suggests someone who has been focused, determined, and willing to put in the work required to succeed in one of the most competitive fields there is. On a personal level, Label has also moved forward in a very positive way. In May 2020, she shared the news that she was expecting her first child with her partner, the model Miles Garber. It was an announcement that pointed to a life that had moved well beyond the brief moment of tabloid interest that had attached itself to her name a few years earlier, and one that painted a picture of someone who was genuinely happy and settled. The combination of professional momentum and personal contentment is, by any measure, a good place to be, and Label appears to have found both. The second name linked to Harry during this period is Sarah Ann Macklin, and her story carries with it an additional layer of significance that the others in this chapter do not, because the timeline of her alleged connection to Harry overlaps directly with the beginning of his relationship with Meghan Markle, the woman he would go on to marry. According to reports, Harry and Macklin, who works as a model, were secretly seeing each other during June and July of 2016. The two are said to have met at a party where Harry got her phone number, and a source who spoke to the Daily Mail suggested that the two went on a number of dates during that period. However, whatever was developing between them did not last. The same source indicated that the connection fizzled out relatively quickly, and it was not long after that Harry's relationship with Markle began to grow more serious. In the broader sweep of Harry's romantic history, Macklin occupies a place right at the very end of one chapter and the very beginning of another. A transitional moment that, in hindsight, carried a great deal of significance, even if neither she nor Harry could have known quite how things would unfold from that point. Since those reported dates with Harry, Macklin has built a life and a career that are genuinely worth talking about on their own terms. She has continued to work as a model, but she has also developed a significant second strand to her professional identity. She trained as a nutritionist and now hosts a podcast called Live Well, Be Well, which covers topics related to health, nutrition, and mental well-being. The podcast reflects a set of interests and commitments that clearly go well beyond the world of modelling, and it has helped her establish a distinct and credible voice in a space that genuinely matters to a lot of people. Perhaps most notably, Macklin is also the founder of the Be Well Collective, an organisation with a very specific and meaningful focus. The Be Well Collective aims to bring nutritional education and mental health coaching directly to models working within the fashion industry. A group of people who, despite being highly visible, often operate in an environment where the pressures on their physical and mental health can be considerable and where support is not always readily available. The work that Macklin is doing through the collective is the kind of thing that can make a real difference to real people. And the fact that she has channeled her energy and her profile into something with that level of purpose says a great deal about who she is. Looking at these two women, and indeed at all of the women whose names have appeared throughout this story, a few things become apparent. The first is that the connections they had with Harry, however brief or however serious, were rarely the defining moments of their lives, even when the press tried to make them so. The second is that almost without exception, these women have gone on to build lives that are rich, varied, and meaningful in ways that have nothing to do with their proximity to a member of the royal family. Some have built successful careers in entertainment, sport, or business. Others have found their purpose in charitable work or in creating organizations that address genuine needs. Several have found lasting personal happiness in relationships and families of their own. The third thing that becomes apparent, and perhaps the most important, is how often the media emerges as a complicating or damaging force in these stories. Whether it was the press intrusion that made Chelsy Davy's years with Harry so difficult to navigate, the coverage that contributed to Caroline Flack's struggles, or the relentless speculation that followed women like Ellie Goulding and Cressida Bonas even after their connections to Harry had ended, the pattern is a consistent one. Being linked to Prince Harry brought with it a level of public attention that very few people are truly equipped to handle, and the consequences of that attention were not always trivial. What emerges from looking at all of these stories together is a picture that is more nuanced and more human than the tabloid versions of these events tend to suggest. These were real people navigating real relationships under extraordinarily unusual circumstances, and the fact that so many of them have come out the other side with their sense of self intact, and in many cases with careers and lives that they appear to be genuinely proud of, is something worth acknowledging. Prince Harry's story eventually led him to Meghan Markle, to a family of his own, and to a life that looks very different from the one he grew up in. But along the way, the women who were part of his journey were writing their own stories at the same time. And those stories, it turns out, are well worth telling in their own right.